This is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 318.
We worked with a mining company, for example, in Australia, that believed that they needed to expand the mine itself. And our economists did an analysis, and we said to them, the mine is fine and the ore body is rich enough. What you need to do is make better use of your processing plant. So we built them an actual model, and they played with it for 2 days, and they saw what we meant, and they came up with an approach for doing it, and they sold the mine for several $1 billion about 6 months later.
G'day, this is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 318, and today we continue our Best of series with Dr Lia DiBello on debunking the 10,000 hour mastery rule through accelerated learning and how this can be used to drastically improve business outcomes.
I am your host, Greg Layton, founder of Chiefmaker and the Council of Chiefs. And I believe there is a great chief in all of us, and that through listening to the stories, strategies and techniques of great CEOs, each of you can find and leave your own legacy through your work. The Inner Chief Podcast is where you will learn how to think and make moves like a CEO. For over a decade, I've helped CEOs and senior executives around the world boldly lead change, inspire their people, and leave a legacy. So every 2 weeks, I'll bring a deep diving interview with one of these CEOs or another one of a mid to large organisation so you can find your own path to greatness as an executive.
Chiefs, in this episode I chat to Dr Lia DiBello. Lia is the former president and CEO of WTRI, an organisation that builds cutting-edge cognitive science into products that can improve performance in business. She has now moved on to new pastures and is the research director for ACSILabs. Lia is best known for the development of an activity-based strategic rehearsal that has been shown to greatly accelerate learning through cognitive reorganisation, in some cases by many, many months. She received her PhD in cognitive psychology at CUNY Graduate School in New York, and her work at WTRI has attracted 17 research funding awards from the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the Russell Sage Foundation. Today, you're going to hear Lia talk all about unlocking your potential through accelerated learning, how it is possible in the business context to cut the 10,000 hour rule of mastery down to just 16 hours. The number one mistake most leaders make in their learning that is costing them enormously, and using learning to drastically improve business outcomes.
Now, Chief, do you find yourself at work in one of those incredibly stressful moments where you've got someone on your team that either isn't performing or is behaving poorly, and you know deep down that it needs a difficult conversation? One of those ones that can keep you up at night. You know, if you get wrong, there's going to be HR issues, but you know, if you get right, it could actually be a little bit career defining, and it will make life so much better for so many people, but you just keep putting it off and off and off. Well, Chief, we've created the ultimate resource for you. It is called Difficult Conversations. Download, it's not hard, but what's in it is what's most powerful. The mindsets, the frameworks, and even some of the scripts, the words to use to make those conversations much more easy. Just go to chiefmaker.com/difficult and you could download the full resource right there.
Righto, Chief, let's listen to our Best of series guest, Dr Lia DiBello.
Okay, it's time now to invite and welcome Lia DiBello to the show. Lia, thank you so much for giving us your time and energy. Welcome to the Inner Chief.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Lia, look, it's been a fascinating journey for you. I've read your background and your bio, and you've been a co-author, and you're now the CEO of WTRI. But I'd like to begin and go right back to the beginning and a bit about your childhood and where you grew up. Can you tell a bit of a story that sums up your childhood and your early life?
I had a pretty ordinary life. My stay-at-home mom, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, came from a large family, upstate New York in the U.S. And probably the only thing that would have foretold my eventual career as a cognitive scientist is I did spend a lot of time, I had a lot of freedom, unlike today's kids. I actually used to, when my mother took a nap, I used to sneak out of the house as a 2-year-old and go outside and play and explore and just go and meet people and talk to them and try to ask them a lot of questions about their lives and try to get back in time and into my bed before my mother realized I didn't take a nap. So that was probably...
You sound like a podcast host, just interviewing people about their lives.
I did, yeah, I did. And I would try to get them to let me in their houses by telling them stories about my dolls. I would bring a doll and I'd say, my doll really wants to come in your house and see where you live and try to, charm them into letting me come in their houses and talk to them. But of course,
what was your strike rate, Leah? What was your strike rate?
Actually, I was, I have to say it. I was very cute, so they let me in pretty much all the time. My brother was in kindergarten. My mother was asleep.
There you were roaming the streets.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine if a kid did that these days? It would be an entirely different story. There'd be police and all sorts of people swooping in, helicopters.
Child protective
your
services.
mum would be locked up and throw away the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, how did you go through your life and end up in this world of cognitive science and accelerated learning? How did all that begin?
Well, I think it did begin then because one of the things I noticed as a very small child is that people, I would tell them stories, and I realized even at that age that people made up their own lives as they went along. That the people would listen to what I was telling them, and they would hear the same story differently. So I go next door to Mrs. McMahon, and I would tell her a story about my life, what I did that morning, and I would tell a different lady the same story, and they would hear different things. And I thought that was very interesting that people had a mental life. That just because you told them something, it didn't mean that they didn't have their own mental filter through which they experience their lives.
Yeah.
So
isn't that an easy thing to forget when we're communicating?
Yeah. So even as a 2 or 3-year-old, I was experimenting with people and getting very interested in their mental lives. So wow. I think it started then.
And when you went to university and moved into that part of your life, did you just go straight into a psych major, and was there something within that course that really piqued your interest?
Actually, I did my honors thesis on the it was the 70s, and everybody was very concerned about activism and feminism and race relations, and I was swept up in all that. More because, honestly, it was just the thing to do, and I don't think I was mature enough to really understand the historical significance of anything. But I did start to think that it probably all had the same roots, that people, that cultural attitudes probably weren't really attitudes. They were probably mental models that had some sort of constructive roots, that people have a theory of life, and that the outcome, that attitudes towards certain groups or gender or whatever are actually outcomes that are the result of a theory of what's right or wrong, or different categories. And so I started to do research on that when I was about 18, 19 years old. And I started to notice that in cultures where women were a part of the economy, where men and women had similar roles in the economy, like agrarian cultures, where both men and women were in the fields, there was no sexism. But where in cultures where men and women had very different roles, even if they were equal roles, and boys were raised by their mothers and may not even meet their fathers until they were maybe 13 or 14 years old, there was massive amounts of sexism and crime against women. And I thought, it's really probably more of a crisis of male identity, where you live with your mother your whole life and you don't even get to meet another man, let alone understand what it is to be a man until you're 13 or 14 years old. So your attitude towards women is really an attitude towards your female self. And I started to look at how, it was more of a construction of identity. And that led into how other, it was a kind of clinical application, which I didn't stick with, but just how people construct theories and mental models. But that was the first one I worked on.
And those mental models shape the way they view the world, the way they behave, everything, right. The way they interact with other people, as you're saying. And that little story you told there of the difference between an agrarian culture and perhaps some of the more modern Western cultures where the roles are so different. And isn't that fascinating that there is no sexism in those agrarian cultures? Everyone's equal.
Right.
Well, that's quite fascinating. And so how do you think that shaped or helped you move into this world of accelerated learning? Because accelerated learning is a different world to looking at some of those topics in one way, but in other ways I can see how the mental model is so important. How did you move into this world? Because you've really had a lot of success and co-authored books. There's another book coming out which we'll talk about. But how did you make that shift?
Well, I don't think I was actually very interested in anything like gender roles or anything like that. I think it was just what was available to look at in the 70s. I think that what I got out of it was the fact that everything comes down to mental models. And then as I got older and more went to graduate school, the mental models were more interesting. When I in the 1980s was the influx of technology into business, and business was changing dramatically, where people had to, with the globalization of the economy, business was becoming, literally a million times more complex between 1970 and now, with computerization, and business was the first domain of practice that got hit with that. And I was very interested in how cognition and mental models started changing rapidly as a result of the influence of complex technologies into workplaces. So that's where I got hooked.
Now, Lia, I want to make a quick point here, a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain in detail or through a story or an example, what is a mental model?
That's a good question. The best way to put it is that we don't really have access to reality per se as human beings. We only have our interpretation of the inputs of our perceptions, and we make sense of the inputs through some sort of framework. So in a way, we're always develop, we always have a simulation of the world in our heads. And in order to make the simulation orderly, we have a mental model, which is a kind of theory of reality that guides it. So at the most primitive level, we all believe in up and down. We believe in ourselves as a unique person. You know, like children, one of their first concepts is a sense of self separate from their parents. That happens at about 6 to 8 months. Before that, they don't realize that they're separate from their parents. They think they're all part of the same person. As you know, they believe they're connected to their mother. So you gradually develop this model of the world and yourself in it. As you get older and more experienced, your mental model becomes quite complicated. So in your particular profession, you have a mental model of what an interview is. You know, you believe that people telling stories makes it more available to other people, more understandable. You have a theory of mind, you know, how people understand things. And it's how you filter your reality. So
I think
what
that last point is important. It is how you filter your reality. It's
Yeah.
all the theories that I hold in my head. It's all my beliefs, from philosophical, spiritual, even some of the scientific beliefs. Perhaps an example is if we go back to maybe some of the great scientific discoveries, where for a long, long time everybody thought, or the mental model of the world, that the world was flat.
That's right.
Right. And so everyone's pictures and the way they responded to the world was that the world was flat. And then all of a sudden someone said, hang on, it might be round or spherical. Right. And that just changed everyone's mental model, but it took a long time for them to change it. Is that an example, I suppose?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It is. It's a really good example. And mental models can really get in the way of understanding something that's right in front of you, like the fact that the world is not flat. So for tens of thousands of years, nobody would take a ship very far in the ocean because they were absolutely convinced they would fall off the edge.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it really does constrain you when you have a mental model. And in medicine, people believed for many years that infection or bacteria didn't exist. Now, we literally all live twice as long as we did 120 years ago because we believe in infection. But nobody's ever seen a germ, right, with the naked eye, so we now wash our hands. We practice safe hygiene, and we take antibiotics, and we literally live twice as long.
Okay, now I get mental models in even more depth. So how does this apply, like in your world and where you've gone with your career is expertise and accelerated learning in the business world, right? So business expertise. Can you explain some examples of business expertise and how you're helping people understand the pathway to expertise?
So an expert, imagine it this way. An intuitive expert is a person who understands, whose mental model allows them to see things other people can't see. So you and I are both native English speakers. And therefore, even though we've never met, you understand me instantly because you're an expert at English. You don't have to work hard to understand what I'm saying. At least, the audio part, right? Maybe what I mean, what I say, you might, So anyway, So it's almost like an expert sees colors that other people can't see.
Yeah.
So a business expert is somebody who, through experience and through iterative trial and error, has developed an in-depth understanding of the business domain where they can see trends and they can read in the tea leaves or in the indicators events and forward simulate patterns in his head or her head that are coming that other people are blind to. So think about the subprime mortgage crisis in 2007, 2008. A lot of people saw that coming, but a lot of people didn't. And other types of business trends. You know, Warren Buffett made a lot of money. He gave lots of large companies billion-dollar loans at 40% interest and got the money ready because he knew that these huge companies were going to crash. But he was fine because he saw it coming. So basically, an expert is a person who can see things that other people can't see in the same landscape. And what I study is how people get there. They're not born that way. It's through a process of experience and learning from experience and learning to decode patterns. And accelerated expertise is the process through which that becomes accelerated. And basically, without getting into too much detail, there are certain mechanisms in the brain that are responsible for the development of expertise, and we have tapped into them, and we accelerate the rate at which you get to those stages by using our technology.
So I'll give you a mental model of the world that is held by a lot of people, and that is the 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
That is something we all have probably heard of, that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm guessing through your work that the 10,000 hour rule gets debunked, a bit like the world was flat and now it's round. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We think it's about 16 hours.
16? Wow. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about that because that's really cool. Okay, how do we go from 10,000 hours to 16 hours?
Well, that's pushing it, but that's possible. It's the brain doesn't actually have a sense of time. It has a sense of trial and error cycles. It's actually very similar to deep learning in AI. Deep learning. Are you familiar with deep learning?
Only at a very high level. So
okay.
Best we do a deep learning to deep learning before we do 10,000 into 16.
Okay. So basically, the brain requires cycles of trial and error to get to levels of expertise. It takes about 10,000 hours for those trial and error cycles to happen by themselves. You know, basically going through life, having things happen, learning from it. You know, you're putzing along and then something happens again and you learn from it. If you were to compress time and accelerate the cycles and pack them all into a shorter amount of time, you get the same effect.
Yeah, because the point is the brain doesn't understand time, it understands iterations.
That's right.
Yeah. Can I give a bit of an example? Because, there's a national football league in Australia called the AFL. It's very, very similar to the NFL or any of the major sporting codes. And forever and a day, they used to have this life cycle of, on a Monday morning, they'd do a review of the game, they'd prepare a week, they'd play on a Saturday, and then they'd recover on a Sunday. And that would be a one iteration, right, of their performance review cycle. Mm-hmm. Now, I went into a club about 3 years ago called the Fremantle Dockers, and I watched as instead of running that cycle once per week, they started running it 4 and 5 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so instead of being able to learn all their lessons once, they would come into the meeting room on a Monday morning, they'd do their review, they would prepare for a game scenario, right? That afternoon, they would go and do it, they would film the game scenario, They would cut up all the film, get all the stats and the data, and they would do that again on the Tuesday and again on the Wednesday. So they had accelerated their learning 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was really cool. So that's what we're talking about here, right? Are you compressing the number of iterations to improve faster?
Right.
Yeah.
And you actually mentioned one key factor of that, which is they get all the data, they look at the data, and then they get to do it again. Without the data, the cycles don't mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's based on a very simple principle, which is the brain does not like to be wrong. So if you do something and it doesn't work, if you have a mental model that predicts that you're going to do something and it doesn't result in what your brain thought it would result in, and you get some feedback that it didn't work, the brain doesn't like that. It will all automatically start to search for new paths to a different get to
the result, to win, right, or to get the outcome, right? Yeah.
So the next time you do it, it will be different. You can't help it.
Yeah.
Now, Chief, do you want to take your game to a new level, or that of your people? Our mini MBA in leading high-performance teams now has the highest NPS of any mini MBA style program in Australia at 91. Why? Because when you do the program, you get immediate and tangible performance improvement. You get dedicated time working on the business as opposed to away from it. We have a practical, real-world approach that we teach frameworks that you implement in your business as we go, and then you share and learn with your peers and with me as your coach. So the cost benefit is immediate, right? The weekly coaching sessions are live and you get a chance to ask questions direct to me and of your peers, and the time management is completely achievable because you're only spending a couple of hours a week on this at max, and those 2 hours are actually working on the business. So if you want to add something that really changes your game, that helps you become a real master of transformation and change, and to inspire your people and love your job, check out chiefmakeup.com/mini MBA.
And just to link this back to when we were saying, let's talk about deep learning and then 10,000 hour rule. My limited understanding of deep learning is that it runs a lot of iterations very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so the AI code fails quickly or learns of itself quickly because it runs so many iterations so fast. Is that what it means?
Yeah, well, with deep learning, you run millions of iterations. Now, a computer can run many more millions of iterations than we can. However, I used to think we don't need as many, but actually that's not true. Because what we do when we learn in an accelerated way, particularly in compressed time, is it calls into play our adaptive unconscious. Our adaptive unconscious learns 200,000 times faster than our conscious awareness. And how you activate your adaptive unconscious is with compressed time. So, for example, if you want to learn something in an accelerated fashion, what you do is you do your trial and error cycles really quickly and don't give yourself time to think. This automatically triggers the part of your brain that's on autopilot. So it activates the part of your brain that does what you would do automatically, without reflection or without hesitation. That part of your brain is the part that you want to reprogram, and that like, especially if you're an athlete, and that you want to retrain and condition. So that part of your brain learns a lot faster than your conscious awareness. And probably what's happening at a preconscious level is you are running millions of cycles at once. You just can't be aware of it. So everything you've ever tried in your whole life is being applied to that problem.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. The analogy I've used, it's not a perfect analogy, but one that tends to paint a reasonable picture is that the conscious awareness is something like the RAM in a computer. It can only run a certain number of programs at a time. If you run too many, it fails. But it's also a bit sort of limited by things like sometimes your ego gets involved and it gets a bit excited about the world. But you run too many things and it crashes. Whereas your unconscious attention is a little bit more like your hard drive. It's got, terabytes of data. But just imagine that all that information, it's constantly checking off against each other. It's constantly working. But it has all your beliefs, your mental models, all the history, all your memories. And it's working through those at any given point in time and working out the best way to thrive or operate in the world around you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's defragging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The interesting thing there that, I think about the process that most people go through in their review process is the review process is very conscious awareness based.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what you're saying is what we need to do is reduce the amount of conscious awareness review of a failure and allow the unconscious awareness to just have another go. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. Now, or you can have conscious awareness of the manipulation of your unconscious. So, and I think that that's what we do. We say, okay, from 9 to 5 today, we're going to drive ourselves crazy and try everything we can as fast as we can to get to the goal and not worry about whether or not we're right. We're going to try every wild ass thing we can think of.
Cool. Yep.
And then at 5 o'clock, we're going to stop. Go home, take a nap, come back tomorrow, and then tomorrow the answer will be there.
Yeah. There's a model that we teach here called Prepare, Perform, Recover, Review.
Yeah.
And the recovery process you just spoke about there is vital for the reorganization of our thinking, to give us time and perspective, and to come back fresh, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so sorry, go on.
I was going to say we've all had that moment where we're working on something and we can't get to an answer, and we wake up the next morning and we know the answer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Comes to you in the shower or something.
Yeah, that's right. And that's because, you've been working on it in your sleep, you've been working on it in your preconscious. You don't stop just because once you get the ball rolling, it keeps going.
Okay. I think you've sort of answered this, but it's a whole question of if we're going to compress 10,000 hours into more like 16 or whatever the number is, now there's a lot of iterations. How do you safely fail fast? Right? Because sometimes over that 10,000 hours, there's a lot of big lessons, a lot of things that might take people time to adjust in their mental models. How do you do that quickly, I suppose, and safely?
Well, you do have to have the right goal. One of the things that we learned early on is that you can get people really good at the wrong things. So there's two aspects, two answers to the question. We use simulations so that people can fail safely. We say the risk is virtual, but the benefits are real. We use virtual worlds or we gamify the exercises that we use, and we remove any real risk so that you can actually really try, major things. Like we've done turnarounds of, $30 billion financial services companies. And you obviously don't want to try some of the stuff we tried in our war games with them in real life without making sure it's going to work. But we've been able to build these complex environments with our technology so you can try, world domination before you try it in real life. And we do that. But with 16 hours of doing it in a rehearsal virtual world environment and getting all the data you can be pretty confident that it's going to work in real life, and it does. And you do change what you're going to do at the end. You learn enough to know that what you thought was going to work isn't going to work, and you come up with a better solution. But the other thing that you have to be sure of is that you have the right goal.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of companies believe that their problem is something that it's not. So we worked with a mining company, for example, in Australia, that believed that they needed to expand the mine itself. And our economists did an analysis, and we said to them, the mine is fine and the ore body is rich enough. What you need to do is make better use of your processing plant. You need to get more of the precious metal out of the ore that you're taking out, the material you're taking out. You have enough there to make a lot of money. And you have enough processing equipment to get it out. You just need to look at it differently. You need a different mental model. So we built them an actual model, and they played with it for 2 days, and they saw what we meant, and they came up with an approach for doing it, and they sold the mine for several $1 billion about 6 months later.
Now, when you talk about you built them a model or you take people through a simulation, what we're talking here is you build a computer-based model that emulates or simulates the real world. Is that right?
Well, it depends. We build them either a physical model that they can play with, like
a scale model of their business or something.
Yeah, like sometimes if it's a factory, we'll find an empty building and we'll build them a scale model of their factory that they can actually go in and run.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, or we'll build them a virtual world model of their business that they can log in as avatars and go in and run it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a distributed company where people have to do it together from different parts of the world, and they can all meet in there.
Yeah.
Like a multiplayer virtual
Yeah, sure.
world.
Yeah.
And if it's a big company, like it's a mine or it's a manufacturing company, and the actual work is important to do differently, a virtual world is helpful because you can actually go in and do it.
Yeah, there's a great scene in Apollo 13 where I think it's the reserve pilot, who doesn't go up into space with Tom Hanks and the other astronauts to go to the moon. He stays behind because he was sick, and then the disaster happens where I think there's a gas leak. But they need Kevin Bacon to go back into the simulator, and under very trying circumstances, with a whole bunch of less resources, is to somehow safely get the ship back to Earth. And he tries again and again and again and again. And every time he fails, he has to come out and say, we've got to change this, we have to change this, we have to change this, we have to change this. And it's this process of trial and error, but in a real world scenario, that they realise their mental model was wrong. And eventually they get it right.
Right.
And it's quite a good... I suppose, description where this is what you're essentially building is a scale model of what's going to happen. But now you get to practice safely, right? And get all the benefits of the learning before you go into the real world and apply. Right.
And the reason you want to build a model is because, people think they can build a simulation without people in it. And they have all these assumptions about what people think that aren't actually true.
Oh, yeah.
That you actually... Yeah,
that's so true.
Yeah,
I'm certain. I'm certain that you would find during the building of the simulation that's cathartic in its own right. Like people having to say, "Well, how is this exactly simulated?" Because I'm certain that would teach them so much about their own assumptions, about their own beliefs, that the learning involved in just that would be invaluable.
Yeah, no, it is. How we build the simulations is interesting too. We do field work. It's kind of like when I was a little girl walking around the neighborhood interviewing people. We kind of do the same thing. We interview people. We go to their work sites. We sort of see how they view the work now and what their blind spots are, and we build that in. You know, we build it in so that it's easy to do it wrong and it's easy to do it right.
Mm. I think this is one of the major reasons that projects fail, is the assumptions each and every one of us carries about everyone else's mental models, everyone else's priorities, everyone else's level of commitment, everyone else's ability or capability to get the job done.
Right.
Is that one of the main reasons? And why do major projects fail? Because the level of work you do, Leah, is on these multi-billion-dollar organisations. It's enormous, but so many of those fail. Why is that? Not the projects you work on, by the way. I know they don't fail, but the other ones.
Well, because of the assumptions.
Yeah.
You know, think about the Kevin Bacon story that you just told me. Think about what would have happened if they didn't practice,
Yep.
right? I mean, you go left instead of right, and you're toast, right? I mean, people believe these so-called minor things are minor when actually they're major.
Yeah. So they
and
underestimate the importance of one little thing.
yeah,
You know.
and
Yeah.
it might be the most critical thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, we were working with a company that makes power generation equipment, and these are multi-billion-dollar turbine systems, and the company almost went under because they didn't ever order enough bolts. The bolts. I mean, we're talking about a screw and a nut
Oh my gosh.
that holds the thing on, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so go down to Home Depot and buy them. I mean, it's not like, you know, and it was you know, they would make a federal case out of it, would be an engineering change. I'm like, just drive down the street, buy them, get this multi-million-dollar unit on the truck and shipped, you know. I mean, this whole idea about what's allowed and what's important, and, you know, it was never important enough to plant a bolt, but it obviously couldn't be shipped without it.
What's the like in all the work you've done, what do you think has been the most, I want to say, remarkable or surprising, maybe shocking discovery that a group has made? I mean, the Bolt story, that's pretty funny. But has there ever been a story or a simulation that has just really, really floored the group?
In a good way or a bad way?
Oh, if you've got both, I'd love to hear both.
Well, the most amazing simulation we ever did was a foundry in the Midwest, United States. These guys were they were farmers, probably third or fourth generation farmers who owned land, and they only worked in foundries because in the wintertime there was no crops. So they tended to work in foundries, and they were probably third or fourth generation foundry men. And foundries, as you probably know, most castings are now done in Asia. So foundries are disappearing from the Midwest in the United States. And so these guys were losing their jobs, and most of them are, you know, they're poor and they go to church, and they raise goats, and they're not real ambitious people, but they're all really nice. And the foundry was going under, and we went there and we were trying to save it. And we realized that because of their expertise in multi-ton castings, they were the type of guys who could look at a casting that had to be scrapped, and they could look at some like engine block that goes in a locomotive, and they could tell by looking at it exactly how the mold had been made, how it was poured, every decision that had been made about that casting, because it's all done by hand when they're that big.
Mm.
Just by looking at it, they go, "Oh, wow, you shouldn't have done that. Yeah, I see that now." It's like a secret language, right?
Wow.
So we realized that these guys would make the molds, and the castings would get poured at night, and then they got shipped off to another building, and the guys who made the molds never got to see the castings. And we said, let's just bring the castings back to them and show them to them, and then put them in charge. And when we did that, the scrap rate went from like 14% to less than 2%, which has never been done in the history of multi-ton castings in the United States. And they started turning away huge customers, like major companies, because their pattern, they said, we can't make a casting that meets our, less than 2% scrap rate with your pattern. You need to redesign the pattern. We can't make a mold that meets our specifications with your pattern. You got to redesign it. And they just became amazing world-class experts in multi-ton specialty castings. And they bought the company.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. What a great story.
And it was all done. Yeah, and we did a simulation where we said, okay, we're going to turn the whole thing around where you own the outcome and you get to redesign the whole process with now you're accountable for the outcome. How would you do it? And here's your goal. Profits at X%, scrap at 2%, just that's your non-negotiable goal. Here's all your patterns. And we made miniatures of all their patterns with a 3D printer. And we miniaturized everything as a physical exercise. And we did the whole thing. They didn't even know, how to use a scheduling system in a computer. So we had to, they didn't. And, we said, what's the setback? How long they said, we don't know. We said, okay, now everything takes a week. It just takes a week. Everything takes a week. As of today, everything takes a week. Every step. So we just arbitrarily decided, and as we said, as you get more information, change the lead times. And they did, and they became so profitable that they owned the company, paid off all the debts, and bought another one.
Wow. That is such a fantastic story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was all done with a 2-day, 16-hour simulation.
That is sensational. Now, listen, Lee, we could go on for an age, but I want to talk about a few things before we get into some other closing questions that I ask all our guests. Just what mistake do you think most people make when trying to solve problems?
They think they have to know the answer, rather than admitting they don't know and asking themselves what they have to do to find out the answer.
Yes, that is very, very true. The reason I'm speaking slowly is because I'm flawed a bit and I'm trying to think how that applies to me and the recent mistakes I've been making in my own problem solving. Okay. Now, how do you keep learning now, and do you apply these techniques to all your learning, or is it just to some of it?
I start out every day telling myself that according to my own science, I'm missing something big. Every day, right? that there's something huge that I'm missing, and I look for it. And I also try to have a conversation every day with someone in my field or outside of my field that I can learn from. So today I talked to a strategic leader at Accenture who's an expert in artificial intelligence. I just called her up and said, could you just talk to me? I have a couple questions. I'm a complete idiot in your field, and I realized it a couple days ago. And she was very nice and talked to me for a couple hours. I mean, what is she gonna do, right? She might hang up on me. So what?
So what? Call someone else.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been doing that since I've been 20 years old. Of course, when I was 20, I could say, I'm only 20, I don't know anything. I can't say that anymore, but I have a different story, you know.
That's right.
Yeah. But the point is that I just start out every day saying, you know, I can learn from everybody. And I'm probably missing something, and I just have to keep looking for it.
And you got to not pretend you know the answer. You have to work out the questions and the data you need to find out what the answer might be.
Yeah, exactly. And it is more fun that way because then life is always a puzzle. And as a scientist, you know, you can't have fun having all the answers. Then you're not a good scientist anyway. And it's much more fun to be in love with the question.
What are the biggest things we've learned about neuroscience in the past, let's say, 2 to 3 years?
Well, the biggest neuroimaging has really taught us a huge amount, but I think the biggest thing we've learned since I've been looking at the brain is how complicated it is. I was listening to an interview by a neuroscientist whose name I can't remember right now, but they've tried to map the human brain, you know, which was never a good idea, but it's kind of interesting that they tried. I was curious about what would happen. And they realized that every human brain has a zettabyte of data. Zettabyte.
Yeah, how big's that? Sounds big.
It's big. A zettabyte is more computing power than all the computers in the world right now. So each person's brain has more computing power than all the computers in the world. Every idiot is smarter or has more going on than all the computers in the world, right? I mean, when I'm driving on the California freeways and somebody cuts me off, I think that was a zettabyte that did that. I mean, that's amazing. You know? And, you know, I think the more we learn, it's sort of like the universe, right? We've been exploring the universe and we found out that there are maybe millions of galaxies. And we really just wanted to see if there was anything beyond the moon when we started, right? So it's kind of like that with the brain. The more we look, the more we find. It's like an inverse galaxy in there. But we also are finding out that I think what I'm finding out is that the adaptive unconscious is much, much more important than anything that's available to our conscious awareness. And we're starting to finally understand how that works.
Can you explain?
And of course,
can you explain more about the adaptive unconscious?
Well, the best way to say it is this. We've been around, our human species has been around as it exists right now for 170,000 years. In Australia, maybe longer. And we have not evolved at all biologically. We're the same. And yet, in 170,000 years, the world has changed dramatically, and we've adapted. So the same people that were chasing little rodents in a cave are using an iPhone, invented it, invented planes, rockets, are driving Teslas, right? The same brain is doing all of that as it was the same brain that was, killing rodents with a rock in a cave. All of the change in us has been adaptive. We've adapted. An iPhone doesn't even come with a user's manual anymore. We don't need it. And the adaptive unconscious is the part of the brain that learns rapidly when the world has changed. So it kicks into gear when there's an ice age, when a saber-toothed tiger is about to eat you, when there's a massive disruption in the environment that threatens the survival of the species. What's exciting about now is that the adaptive unconscious thinks that our survival is threatened every day because there's so much disruptive change going on. And so it's learning, thinking that it needs to learn Facebook to survive, right? Learn, Snapchat to survive, because it's that type of disruption that gets it excited and gets it going. So instead of going to school, learning a trade, getting a job at 21 and never learning anything again and getting senile at 40, we are lifelong learners now because of the adaptive unconscious.
Wow, and I suppose the key word there is it's adapting to the world. It's not evolving, is it? As you say, because It hasn't changed biologically for 170,000 years. So it's just adapting to what's around it. Mm-mm.
And at certain points in history, it's probably largely asleep. But right now, it's wide awake.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Chief, small from Lia in a minute. Now, recently on the show, I spoke with the CEO of Have Us Read in Australia, Shane Russell. We discussed knowing your audience inside out, how not to completely stuff up a PR campaign like Bud Light, and adapting to the ever-changing media landscape. All chiefs need to be masters of comms, and this is one of the global leaders. Here's what Shane had to say about a communication strategy fit for 2024.
There's a lot in the world that's changing, and we've talked about this from a communications perspective. It's chaotic. It's how do you know what to communicate? But that's where we think brands really have a role and an opportunity moving forward, which is, being one of the trends is truth-telling versus storytelling. For a long time, we talked about brands and people as storytellers. We think now the opportunity is to be truth-tellers.
You can listen to that informative chat with Shane Russell by going to chiefmaker.com/317. And while you're there, please feel free to subscribe to the podcast and check out all the other great interviews with our chiefs and gurus. If you want to subscribe again, just go to chiefmaker.com/subscribe. All right, Chief, let's get back to our best of series with Dr. Lia DiBello.
So if you could just imagine it's a bit like The Matrix. In the movie The Matrix, they lie down on the chair and they plug the little thing in the back of the head and they puts the Kung Fu disc in, and next thing you know, you've learned Kung Fu. If you could upload one skill set or knowledge or philosophy into everyone's brain, including, or maybe in particular, the rooster that cut you off on the highway the other day, what would you upload?
I guess literature. I think it's sad that nobody reads classic literature anymore because I think all the answers are there.
Wow. Could you recommend one or two of your favourite books, literature books, for the audience that they have to read?
I have to think about that. I guess anything by Henry James or Jane Austen.
I'll put a few options in the show notes so people can download or go to Amazon and do that, and I'll also put the links to your two books. So let's quickly just touch base on those two books, if that's all right. So there's already a book on Amazon right now that you're a co-author of. It's called Accelerated Expertise, Training for High Proficiency in a Complex World. Now, you've said to me, I haven't read this book just yet, but as you said to me before, it's a pretty heavy book, right? It's got a lot of depth to it, right? A lot of science. So do they just skip to your chapter and just leave the other, because I know there's some pretty big names, just leave the other guys out?
No. It's I'm an author of the whole book. We're all co-authors of the whole book.
Right.
You have to read the whole book.
Okay, righto. Okay, so I'll put a link to that one. And now you've got a new book coming out, which is called the Oxford Handbook of Expertise Research. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you've done the chapter in that on expertise in business, and that's coming out as its own manuscript very, very soon.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about that, or have we sort of covered some of the content already?
We've covered a lot of that. I mean, I think that that whole book is a lot more available. In other words, it's written for people who want to understand the cognitive science of expertise and how it's relevant to the world. A lot of the people describe the techniques that we use in the field and how it's being applied. And my chapter is about why I studied business and why it's relevant to study expertise in business, particularly in today's world. How skills are changing, and how business expertise is an important thing to pay attention to for employability. So it's pretty, I think most people will like that book, actually, not just my part.
I can't wait to actually get my head into that. That is fascinating, because I'm a very, very firm believer that the mental models, our mental skill sets, the way we view the world, the way we operate, play an enormous role in our happiness, our success, and in a pure business context, the amount of profit an organisation can make, how much value you can add to it. Because like you, I've worked across a lot of organisations, and I have just seen some of the most remarkably strange decisions made that clearly have all sorts of assumptions built into them. And when you're in that world, and when you're the chaos of modern and the complexity of modern business all around you, it's very hard to see the thing that you should do. So, being able to stand back and assess the world, fail fast, learn, don't pretend you know the answer, because those assumptions that you carry, even those cognitive bias, play a huge role in your ability to get a result or not.
Yeah, and you're on autopilot a lot of the time.
Yeah, and isn't that one of the... So autopilot can be brilliant, or it can be absolutely dangerous.
Right. And you could... Like what we see in our simulations is everybody knows that their autopilot is the problem. But in the simulation, the autopilot gets turned on and they keep making the same mistake, even though they know they're not supposed to. It's like watching somebody smack themselves in the head, and not be able to stop. But the nice thing about the simulation is it conditions them to stop doing it, because the result does not, they get feedback that it's not going to give them the result that they want, and the brain finally reconditions itself to stop doing it. I mean, it probably applies to the rest of life, You probably, even in our personal lives, we probably make the same mistakes over and over again because we don't get the feedback that it's not going to work.
Yeah, and we don't generally believe when someone else tells us it's not going to work. We almost have to fail ourselves, right? We're quite poor at that. But I was just thinking about, one of the things that I do from people from a career perspective is I get them to stand right back and we draw their trajectory of their career, so where they've come from, almost as like a line over time. And, the time is on the y-axis and the level of seniority and their pay packet is on the y-axis. And they draw where it's gone from all the way through time to now, and then they draw based on what's currently happening, where they think it will go into the future. Right. Now, what I've found almost every single person makes is a key assumption that the difficulty in getting to a middle management role is the same level of difficulty as getting to the top. So they keep the curve going at the speed or the angle at exactly the same rate. And it's not, because all of a sudden you're competing against the top 1%. You're top gunning, right? So it's the best of the best people in the room, the smartest people who have the right mental models going, who can actually forecast the future and simulate to some degree. And it's much more difficult. So all their behaviour and all their action in the world is making assumption that what they're doing now is going to get them to the next level. And my experience is that 98% of the time, that's not true. They're not quite there yet.
Right. Of course, I've never successfully worked for anyone. Maybe you shouldn't put that in your podcast.
No, I think you could flip it around, like you could say, look, no one has ever successfully led me.
Well, it's true though. I mean, I probably should add this to my story. I mean, I was working in a dress shop right after college, and I was working as a model, and this lady came in, and she was buying a dress for her daughter, and she started talking to me, and she said, "You don't belong here. Here's my card. Call me. I'm a professor at Harvard." And I did.
Wow.
And that's how I got back into academia. And then I read my mentor's book. I started taking courses at Harvard, and then I read my thesis, my PhD thesis mentor's book, and I said, I'm calling her. And I did. And she said, drive here to New York and have dinner with me. And I did. And she said, move here and work with me. And I did. And the rest is history.
Wow. That's a great little story, yeah. Taking those opportunities, right? As they occur.
I mean, I never really, people ask me, well, you had a boyfriend and I said, oh, I didn't care. I wasn't going to let any of that get in my way. I'm never questioned. I mean, I feel like I was born to be what I do. And every time I had an opportunity to jump a couple steps on the path, I just did it.
Wow, this is great. Look, Lia, we could keep going on forever, but I've got a few final questions for you all our chiefs and gurus, and you are a true chief and a true guru because you do lead a business and you are an absolute guru in expertise. So what is the next thing in your life you're most excited about?
Well, we are scaling our technology right now. And we've taken all the accumulated research that we've done over the past several years, and we're building it into our platform, and we're trying to sell licenses to the big companies like, Facebook, Amazon, etc. And we have somebody working on that pretty much full time. And so it's sort of like, somebody did all this physics and they discovered combustion engines and metallurgy and everything and eventually came up with a car. Well, we finally have our car, and it's got all our thinking in it, and it drives. And it's cool because we don't have to charge hundreds of thousands of dollars for people to have our thinking now. It's a gadget. It could be an app. And so we have a platform now to build, to make accelerated learning available to everyone.
That is fantastic. And so how do people connect with you to find out more about that? Because I know there'll be people listening to this that think we need to find out more about that opportunity.
On our website, there's info at WTRI.com, and we have somebody who's answering questions about that. And we have a new product, Max, MAXX, which is our first example of it that's, very affordable. And it's for people who want to accelerate their learning and making better business decisions. But it's only an example. It's built on the platform, and it's just one of the first of an infinite number that you can build with this platform.
Great. Well, I'll put all the links to that on the show notes. So anybody who would like to get in touch with you or the business, just go through that. So how do people connect with you directly? Is it through the website, or is LinkedIn best for you?
LinkedIn is good, and I don't mind getting email myself. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's real easy. Lia, Lia, at WTRI.com. I've already declared that I don't know anything, so if somebody wants to tell me what else I don't know, I'm open. And so I'm very happy to talk to people. And like I said, my next big thing is I've made a lot of people rich, and I'm sort of done with that. I want to give our science to the people, so to speak. I think it needs to be disseminated.
Yeah, great.
And that's what we're doing now.
So what are you most grateful for in life, Lia?
Honestly, my curiosity. I have a rich mental life, and I think it's because I'm so curious.
If you could be CEO of any organization in the world, and it can't be WTRI, what would it be, or which one would it be?
Amazon.
Amazon. Okay.
Yeah.
And what is a final message of wisdom and hope you think is vital for the next generation of executives? The floor is yours now. It's a final question, so go for it.
Make mistakes. Lots of them.
Beautiful. And do them fast.
Yeah. Yes. And do them safely. Yeah. Wear a helmet.
Oh, Lia, look, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on The Inner Chief. What a fascinating discussion. And I think we might have to continue this again and again. I look forward to catching up with you again in the future. Thank you for your time.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Chief, that sums it up for this week. Having studied accelerated learning inside out for myself through methods like photo reading and speed reading and a whole range of other factors over my life, I can tell you now that the 10,000 hour rule, particularly in business, is one that we can drastically improve. Now, Lia's work has been at the cutting edge for a long time, and I think she's done a brilliant job there describing what we can do. To get all the links and resources for this episode, please check out Lia's work, chiefmaker.com/318.
Now, Chief, if you're yet to rate the episode and subscribe, I hope you'll do so soon. It helps others see the magnificent value that the chiefs and gurus on the show bring to their life and career. So make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app now, give it a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and leave a short review about your favourite episode.
Righto, Chief. As always, remember to stay epic.